There's a moment in every parent's life when they realize that the world they've spent so long building for their child is starting to crumble. And that moment, when it came for me, was at the hands of my own son. Benjamin had spent his life choosing peace over conflict. He believed in the power of walking away, in the strength it took to remain calm in the face of aggression. But his son, Peter, didn't see it that way. To Peter, strength was about standing up for yourself, about fighting back when someone challenged you. He saw his father as weak, incapable of defending himself. The word stung every time Peter criticized him. But what hurt the most was that Peter, the one person Benjamin had poured his heart and soul into raising, couldn't understand his greatest lesson. That true strength comes from within. One night, after a particularly harsh argument, Benjamin found himself at a crossroads. He could continue explaining, continue pleading, or he could finally show Peter that strength isn't about winning battles. It's about maintaining your peace, even when the world wants to push you down. So, Benjamin made a choice that would challenge everything Peter thought he knew about strength. He entered a local martial arts competition, not to fight, but to prove that real power lies not in physical confrontation, but in the discipline, patience, and emotional resilience that comes from within. Peter thought his father would fail. He thought he knew better. But what Benjamin showed him that day changed their relationship forever. What happens when a father decides to teach his son that real strength comes from something much deeper than muscle? You'll be surprised. Benjamin had never been a man of many words, but those who knew him understood that his actions spoke louder than any speech ever could. He grew up in a small, tight-knit community where his family didn't have much, but they had enough. His parents, hardworking but humble, taught him the value of integrity, humility, and peace. His father was a stern man who believed that any conflict could be solved with patience and wisdom rather than brute force. Benjamin took those lessons to heart, and as he grew, he adopted the same philosophy. Benjamin wasn't a warrior in the traditional sense. He didn't have a collection of trophies or medals hanging on his wall, and his days were rarely filled with grand victories. But what he did have was a quiet strength, an inner resolve that carried him through every challenge life threw his way. He didn't need to prove himself to anyone, not to the world, and certainly not to his family. He had built a life, a simple but fulfilling life, where every day was an opportunity to practice kindness and restraint. For years, he worked as a mechanic. It was a job that didn't require much recognition, but he took pride in it. It wasn't about the paychecks or the glory. It was about the satisfaction of fixing something broken, of helping people who didn't know where else to turn. Every car he worked on told a story, and for Benjamin, the act of fixing those machines was a way of making things right in a world that often felt chaotic. The garage was his sanctuary, and the grease under his nails was a mark of pride, not shame. He found peace in the simplicity of his work, and the rhythm of his routine was a comfort that calmed his restless soul. But it wasn't just work that gave Benjamin his sense of purpose. It was family. He married young, and together with his wife, they raised Peter, their only son. From the moment Peter was born, Benjamin knew his role was clear: to provide for his family, to be the steady hand that guided them through life. His wife, a loving and supportive woman, shared his values and helped create a home full of warmth and security. But as Peter grew older, Benjamin's world began to shift. Peter was everything Benjamin could have hoped for in a son. He was smart, ambitious, and full of energy. But unlike his father, Peter was quick to anger, always looking for a fight, always seeking approval from others by proving his toughness. Benjamin tried to instill in him the values he held dear: patience, humility, respect. But no matter how much he tried, Peter wasn't having it. The world Peter saw was one of competition, where strength was defined by how hard you hit back and how loud you could yell. Their relationship began to fray as Peter entered his teenage years. The arguments between father and son grew more frequent, and each one left a bitter taste in Benjamin's mouth. Peter, once the curious child who asked endless questions about life, became a young man who saw his father as weak, someone who refused to fight for what he deserved. Benjamin tried his best to explain, to show his son that real strength wasn't in fighting, but in choosing not to, choosing peace over conflict. But Peter couldn't understand. To him, his father's philosophy was a sign of weakness, a way of avoiding the harsh realities of the world. And as the evening turned to night, Benjamin knew that the real victory had never been about proving who was right. It had always been about teaching his son the most important lesson of all, that true strength lies not in how we fight, but in how we live, how we choose to be who we are, even when the world tells us to be something else. With that, Benjamin leaned back, content in the knowledge that the greatest battle of all, the battle for understanding, for mutual respect, had been won. And for the first time in a long while, he felt a peace that had eluded him for years. As you've seen in this story, true strength isn't defined by how hard we fight or how loud we stand. It's found in our ability to remain calm, to stay true to who we are, and to choose our battles wisely. Benjamin's journey to show his son, Peter, the power of emotional resilience and inner strength is one that can inspire us all. Now, think about your own life. Are you chasing the world's idea of success, or are you defining your own strength on your terms? Are you standing firm in your beliefs, or are you letting outside pressures push you into battles that don't align with your values? Take a moment to reflect on how you can start applying these lessons today. How can you be more intentional about the way you respond to challenges? What can you do to build your own inner strength and stop letting fear or external expectations dictate your path? I want to hear from you. What's the one thing you're going to do this week to step into your own strength? Whether it's choosing peace in a difficult situation, setting boundaries that honor who you are, or simply taking a step towards a more authentic version of yourself. Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this story inspiring, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more content that helps you become the best version of yourself. You're not alone on this journey, and together, we can all learn how to live with purpose, strength, and integrity. Stay true to yourself, and I'll see you in the next video. Benjamin had always been content with his life. He had no desire for accolades or recognition. His life wasn't extraordinary, but it was his, and he found joy in the little things. The smell of fresh-cut grass in the summer, the sound of his wife's laughter in the kitchen, the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. He had created a world for himself where peace reigned, and every day was an opportunity to live with integrity. But as the years passed, something began to change within him. He started to notice the growing distance between him and Peter. The once close-knit relationship they shared had begun to unravel, and the more Peter mocked him for his calm demeanor, the more Benjamin began to question his own values. Was he really teaching his son the right lessons? Was peace the answer, or was there a deeper, more visceral truth that Peter needed to understand? One evening, after a particularly heated argument, Benjamin sat alone in his workshop, staring at the car he had been working on for hours. The steady hum of the shop was comforting, but his mind was elsewhere, wrestling with the thoughts that had been brewing for months. He thought of Peter's words, how his son had belittled him for not standing up for himself. The pain of those words was still fresh, but it wasn't just the pain that lingered. It was the uncertainty. For the first time in his life, Benjamin felt the weight of doubt. Maybe there was something to Peter's insistence on physical confrontation. Maybe, just maybe, he had been wrong all along. But even as those thoughts swirled in his mind, Benjamin knew one thing for sure. He couldn't let Peter continue to see him as weak. Not because of pride, but because he wanted his son to understand that strength wasn't about fighting, it was about standing firm, even when the world tried to push you down. And so, as the night wore on, Benjamin made a decision. It wouldn't be an easy one, but it was the only choice he had left. He would prove to Peter that strength came from within, from emotional resilience and integrity. It wouldn't be through words or explanations, but through actions. And that was when Benjamin decided to enter the martial arts competition. He wasn't there to fight for glory, but to show Peter the true meaning of strength. From that moment, everything changed. As the days passed after Benjamin's decision, a heavy tension settled in his home. The air felt thick, thick with the weight of unspoken words, with the clash of unyielding beliefs. Benjamin had always believed that peace was the strongest weapon, but now, as he prepared to face the competition, his mind constantly returned to the one person who challenged that belief: his son, Peter. Peter had always been a difficult child in some ways. From the time he was young, he had never been content with just following the rules. He was constantly testing boundaries, testing himself. Benjamin had always admired Peter's drive, his ambition, but he also saw how much that ambition could turn into aggression. Peter wanted to prove himself to the world, to everyone who had ever doubted him. And for years, he had been doubting his father's approach to life, doubting the peace Benjamin had so carefully cultivated. "Why don't you just stand up for yourself, Dad?" Peter had asked so many times, the question laced with frustration. "Why do you always let people walk all over you? Why don't you fight for your dignity?" Benjamin had always tried to explain that strength didn't lie in violence, that real strength was about emotional control, patience, and knowing when to walk away from unnecessary conflict. But Peter never understood. As a teenager, he started mocking his father for his calm demeanor, calling him weak. And over time, those jabs became more painful. They struck at Benjamin's core, at the very foundation of who he was, as a man and as a father. Every time Peter spoke, every time he criticized Benjamin for not standing up for himself, Benjamin felt a wave of helplessness. He saw his son growing more frustrated with him, more distant, and it hurt more than anything else. Benjamin had spent his life teaching Peter lessons about the importance of compassion and understanding. But all Peter saw was a man who refused to fight, a man who allowed life's injustices to wash over him without so much as a ripple. To Peter, it seemed like Benjamin didn't care enough to stand his ground. One evening, after Peter had stormed out of the house following another argument, Benjamin sat in his garage, staring at the tools he had used for years to fix cars. The low hum of the fluorescent lights above him did little to calm his racing thoughts. He hadn't realized how deeply Peter's words had affected him until now. The words Peter had thrown at him, weak, cowardly, inauthentic, echoed in his mind, louder than the hum of the lights. Benjamin knew he had to do something. He couldn't just keep taking the verbal jabs without showing his son the truth. He loved Peter too much to let him continue down this path, believing that true strength was measured by how hard you fought. But what could Benjamin do? How could he prove his son wrong? The more he thought, the more he realized that his peaceful existence wasn't enough for Peter to see the truth. It wasn't enough to merely speak about it anymore. He needed to show him. And so, Benjamin made a choice. It was a choice that shocked him as much as it would eventually shock Peter. He would enter a local martial arts competition, not to fight in the traditional sense, but to prove that the discipline required to remain calm and controlled was the truest form of strength. Benjamin had no intention of competing for a trophy or to prove his physical prowess. His goal was to show Peter that strength wasn't defined by physical confrontations, but by mental toughness and emotional control. When Benjamin told his wife, she was taken aback. She knew Benjamin well. She knew how much he valued peace and tranquility. She asked him if he was sure about this decision, but Benjamin, driven by a newfound sense of urgency, was resolute. "I have to do this. I can't let Peter keep thinking that I'm weak. He needs to see that my way, our way, of living is strong," Benjamin explained, his voice firm yet tinged with uncertainty. His wife, though supportive, couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. She knew how much this would affect their family dynamic. But she trusted Benjamin's judgment. She had seen how hard he had worked to create a peaceful home, and she knew he wasn't doing this to prove anything to the world, but to reach his son in a way that nothing else could. Peter, on the other hand, had no idea what was coming. He had no idea that his father, the man he had mocked for years, was about to take on something far more challenging than any physical fight. Peter, entrenched in his beliefs about what true strength looked like, was convinced that his father would fail miserably. He expected Benjamin to be humiliated, to fall flat on his face in front of everyone, to prove once and for all that peace wasn't strength. But Benjamin wasn't worried about failure. In fact, he had accepted it long ago, just as he had accepted the possibility that Peter might never fully understand him. What mattered now was that his actions could speak louder than any words he had spoken in the past. As the day of the competition drew closer, Benjamin found himself wrestling with a new kind of fear, the fear of not being able to show Peter what he needed to see. It was a different kind of fear than he had faced in his years of quiet reflection. It wasn't about physical danger. It was about the emotional toll this would take on his relationship with Peter and whether Peter would ever truly understand the lesson Benjamin was trying to teach him. For the first time, Benjamin didn't just fear the outcome of a situation. He feared the loss of his son's respect. And that fear, in some strange way, pushed him forward. The tension in Benjamin's home became unbearable in the weeks leading up to the competition. Every glance from Peter felt like an unspoken accusation. Every conversation was heavy with the weight of Benjamin's secret, and the distance between father and son continued to grow. Peter, still unaware of his father's decision, seemed increasingly determined to prove that he was right, that peace, patience, and restraint were nothing more than excuses for weakness. And Benjamin, quietly grappling with his inner resolve, knew that the time to show Peter the truth was drawing near. The morning of the competition arrived, and Benjamin couldn't shake the knot of anxiety tightening in his chest. As he dressed in his old, worn-out gym clothes, he caught a glimpse of himself in the mirror. He wasn't a young man anymore. His body wasn't as agile or as resilient as it had once been, and the years of hard labor in the garage had left their mark on his frame. He was older, slower, but his resolve had never been stronger. He wasn't doing this to prove that he could win. He was doing this to show Peter that strength wasn't about how many punches you could throw. It was about how much control you had over your own emotions and reactions. His wife, though worried, gave him a reassuring nod before he left. She had always trusted Benjamin's judgment, but she couldn't ignore the anxiety that lingered in the pit of her stomach. "Be careful," she said softly, her eyes filled with concern. "But I know you're doing this for the right reasons." Benjamin smiled, trying to calm her fears. "I'm not worried about the fight. I'm worried about what happens after." He paused, looking into her eyes. "I need to show Peter that there's more to strength than what he thinks. I need him to see that I'm not weak because I don't fight back." At the competition venue, Benjamin entered the gymnasium with a quiet determination. The sounds of sparring matches and the heavy thud of fists against pads filled the air, but Benjamin focused only on his own thoughts. He could feel the weight of the decision on his shoulders. This wasn't just about him. This was about his son. Peter had always expected his father to engage in physical confrontations, to show him how strong he was in the traditional sense. But now, Benjamin was going to show Peter a different kind of strength, the kind that didn't require a fight. As the competition began, Benjamin was assigned to face opponents who were younger, stronger, and faster. He felt the initial wave of doubt sweep over him. Could he really keep up with these people? But then, as the first bell rang, he reminded himself that this wasn't a race to prove physical superiority. It was about proving a point to his son. He moved slowly at first, feeling the sharp pangs of his aging body as he dodged a series of quick jabs. His arms weren't as strong as they used to be, but his mind was sharp. He focused on breathing, on controlling his body's reactions, on remaining calm no matter how quickly his opponents came at him. Every punch, every block, every move was an exercise in restraint and emotional control. He wasn't trying to win by dominating his opponents. He was trying to win by demonstrating the power of self-discipline. Peter sat in the audience, arms folded across his chest, watching his father's every move. He had come to see Benjamin fail, to see him humiliated. He didn't understand why his father, who had always avoided conflict, would put himself in such a situation. It was baffling to Peter. He expected Benjamin to be an easy target, someone who would crumble under the pressure, someone who would be laughed off the stage. But as the rounds went on, something unusual started to happen. Benjamin wasn't failing. He wasn't winning either, but he wasn't losing in the traditional sense. He was holding his ground, staying calm, refusing to be rattled by any of the punches thrown his way. Benjamin's movements were measured, his eyes steady as he looked at each opponent, never showing fear, never showing doubt. It wasn't about winning. It wasn't about being the best fighter. It was about showing that you could face anything without losing your composure. That real strength was about emotional control. Benjamin's opponents were skilled, but they couldn't shake him. They couldn't force him into a reaction. And that, in itself, was his victory. Meanwhile, Peter's skepticism began to shift. He couldn't understand what was happening. His father, the man who had always walked away from fights, was standing tall, unyielding in the face of stronger, faster opponents. Peter watched in confusion as his father's calmness became a weapon in itself, something he had never considered possible. Benjamin wasn't showing off his physical strength. He was showing something far more profound. His endurance, his ability to remain grounded, was something Peter hadn't expected. As Benjamin's last opponent stepped into the ring, Peter sat back in his seat, now unsure of what to expect. He had watched the entire competition unfold, and for the first time, a flicker of doubt crept into his mind. Could his father actually be stronger than he had ever given him credit for? Could peace really be a form of strength? The questions swirled in Peter's mind, but he wasn't ready to admit them. Not yet. He needed more proof. As the final round of the competition loomed, Benjamin could feel the weight of the eyes upon him. His opponents, the crowd, and most of all, his son. The last opponent, a younger man, was faster and more agile than any of those Benjamin had faced so far. His confidence was palpable, and he was eager to show off his skills, no doubt believing he would easily dispatch the older competitor. The atmosphere in the gym had shifted, buzzing with anticipation. The crowd was restless, eagerly awaiting the outcome. Benjamin took a deep breath and centered himself, just as he had in every round before. He wasn't here to win for the sake of glory. He was here to show Peter that strength came not from how hard you could hit, but from how hard you could stand without breaking. As the bell rang and the match began, Benjamin's movements were slow but deliberate. His opponent lunged, quick and unpredictable, but Benjamin was ready. He sidestepped with ease, letting the young man's energy pass him by, not out of weakness, but out of strategic mastery. It wasn't about outpacing his opponent. It was about outlasting him. Every time his opponent came at him, Benjamin remained calm, his breath steady and measured. The young man was growing frustrated, trying to land a blow that would end the match, but Benjamin's composed nature made it impossible for him to land a clean shot. The audience began to murmur, some puzzled by Benjamin's unconventional approach, others starting to recognize that there was something more to this man than they had initially thought. Benjamin could feel his body beginning to tire, but he wasn't focused on that. Instead, he focused on Peter. He could feel his son's eyes on him, waiting for him to falter. The battle wasn't only physical. The true fight was happening inside, a battle between the man he was and the man he wanted Peter to see. Could he show his son, without saying a word, that real strength was found in the ability to remain calm and centered, no matter the storm around you? Peter's confusion was growing. He had come here with one belief, that his father would fail, that Benjamin's philosophy of peace would collapse in the face of this competition. But now, watching him dodge and evade blow after blow, Peter couldn't understand why his father wasn't giving in. With every moment, Benjamin was showing him something that Peter had never seen before. This wasn't just about winning a fight. It was about demonstrating that true strength was found in the control of oneself, not the domination of others. Peter had always believed that physical confrontation was the only real measure of strength. But here his father was proving him wrong. The round continued, and Benjamin's opponent began to slow. His attacks became more desperate, trying to land a punch that would force Benjamin to submit. But Benjamin remained unshaken, using his years of life experience and emotional control to outlast the storm. He wasn't fighting back, not in the traditional sense. Instead, he was waiting for his opponent to exhaust himself, waiting for his son to understand. The match came to an end, and though Benjamin hadn't won in the traditional way, no knockout, no grand display of physical dominance, the crowd erupted into applause. Benjamin hadn't been defeated, and the audience could sense that there was something powerful about the way he had handled himself. The young man he faced was panting, his energy spent, while Benjamin, though clearly exhausted, remained composed, calm, and unwavering. Peter sat in the stands, his mind racing. He had expected his father to crumble, to embarrass himself. But what he had witnessed shook him to his core. Benjamin hadn't fought back with brute strength, nor had he succumbed to his opponent's attacks. Instead, he had endured with a quiet resilience that Peter couldn't quite grasp, but couldn't deny. It was as though, in that moment, everything Peter had believed about strength was crumbling. Was there really more to life than proving who could fight the hardest? Benjamin walked off the floor, his body sore, but there was no defeat in his eyes, only quiet pride. He had done it, not for the approval of the crowd, not for the glory of winning, but to prove to Peter that the true power was in holding your ground when everything else was trying to push you down. It was in showing restraint, in showing that you could face a challenge without losing your soul to it. When Benjamin finally made his way to Peter, he could see the confusion written on his son's face. Peter was quiet, his arms still folded, but there was a shift in his posture, a subtle change that didn't go unnoticed by Benjamin. The words that had once flowed freely from Peter's mouth, mocking, dismissive, were gone, replaced with an uncomfortable silence. "Dad," Peter said finally, his voice hesitant, I don't get it. You didn't fight back. You could have won, but you didn't. Why?" Benjamin paused, looking at his son for a long moment. "Peter," he began softly, "winning isn't about what you can take from others. It's about what you can withstand from yourself." He paused again, letting the weight of his words settle. True strength isn't about winning the fight. It's about not losing yourself in it. Peter looked at his father, his eyes a mix of awe and confusion. For the first time, he saw a depth in his father's eyes that he had never recognized before. He wasn't just looking at a man who refused to fight. He was looking at a man who had endured, who had chosen to remain true to himself, no matter the cost. Benjamin smiled faintly, as though seeing a small but significant shift in his son's understanding. "I've never been weak, Peter. I've always been strong in ways you never saw. But I hope one day you'll see it too." Peter didn't respond, but the look on his face said everything. Something was beginning to change. The days after the competition felt surreal for Benjamin. The physical exhaustion had worn off, but the emotional weight remained. He hadn't expected the competition to resolve everything. He knew it wasn't just about a single event, but he hoped that Peter had seen something in him, something that would spark a shift in his perspective. Despite everything, Benjamin still feared that his son wouldn't fully understand the lesson he was trying to impart. He had shown Peter the power of self-discipline and restraint, but would Peter be able to grasp it, or would he go back to his old beliefs? Peter, however, wasn't the same as he had been before the competition. Over the next few days, Benjamin noticed something different in him. Peter's once sharp words were now more measured, and the constant mocking, the jabs at Benjamin's way of life, seemed to have quieted. The tension that had plagued their relationship for so long began to lift, but still, Benjamin wasn't sure if it was enough. Peter hadn't said much, hadn't acknowledged the change yet. Benjamin, being the man he was, wasn't one to push for an immediate resolution, but he couldn't help but wonder if Peter was simply trying to process what had happened, or if he had dismissed it entirely. Then, one evening, as they sat down for dinner, just the two of them, Peter finally spoke. "Dad," Peter began, his voice hesitant but sincere, "I've been thinking a lot about what happened, and I think I get it now. I mean, I don't fully understand everything, but I think I get the point." Benjamin looked up from his plate, surprised but relieved to hear the vulnerability in his son's voice. He put his fork down, giving Peter his full attention. "You don't have to understand everything all at once," Benjamin replied gently. "It's a journey, not a single moment of clarity." Peter nodded slowly. "I guess I thought strength was just about fighting, about winning. And I always thought you were just avoiding the fight, not standing up for yourself. But seeing you in that competition, it was like I saw something I hadn't noticed before." Peter paused, his gaze softening. "You weren't just standing there. You were controlling yourself, controlling everything around you. You didn't let your emotions decide for you. You let your actions decide. And I've been thinking, maybe that's the strongest thing a person can do. Benjamin's heart swelled with a quiet pride. The words Peter was saying weren't just an acknowledgement. They were a revelation. For the first time, Peter was beginning to see strength in the very thing he had once scorned. Benjamin didn't need to win Peter's respect the traditional way, by dominating or proving himself physically. He had shown Peter something much more powerful, the strength to remain true to his values, even when everything in the world seemed to demand the opposite. "I was so focused on trying to prove I could fight," Peter continued, his eyes fixed on the table. "But I never saw that true strength wasn't about winning the fight at all. It's about staying true to what you believe in, even when you're tempted to take the easy way out. You didn't need to beat anyone to show your strength. You just showed up, and that's a lot stronger than I thought it was." Benjamin felt a deep sense of relief flood over him. He had hoped for this moment, but he never imagined it would come so naturally, so honestly from Peter. The conflict between them, the years of misunderstanding, had shifted in a single, quiet conversation. Benjamin had shown his son his strength, not through force or aggression, but through emotional resilience. And now, Peter was seeing that strength for what it truly was. But the moment of revelation wasn't just for Peter. It was also a turning point for Benjamin. He had spent so many years trying to teach his son, trying to guide him without imposing his beliefs. He had always hoped that Peter would see the power of peace, but he never realized how much he had been holding back from his son, how much he had been afraid to be vulnerable. Showing his son his own vulnerability, his choice to enter the competition, his willingness to face something so physically challenging despite his age and limitations, was more than just a lesson in strength. It was an opportunity for Benjamin to finally let his guard down and trust that Peter would understand. "I'm proud of you," Benjamin said softly, breaking the silence that had settled between them. "Not because of what you've said, but because you've taken the time to think about it. I've always believed in you, Peter, even when you didn't believe in me." Peter lifted his head, meeting his father's eyes. For the first time in a long while, there was no anger, no resentment, just understanding. And in that moment, Benjamin knew that the journey wasn't over. But it had taken a monumental step forward. There was still much for Peter to learn and for Benjamin to teach, but the foundation had been laid. Strength was no longer about fighting. It was about how you chose to fight, or whether you chose to fight at all. And now, Peter was beginning to see that. He was beginning to understand that true strength wasn't always about the battles you won, but the ones you refused to fight. And for the first time, father and son were on the same path, each learning from the other, in ways that would change their lives forever. The days following their conversation were filled with a kind of quiet understanding that Benjamin hadn't expected, yet had always hoped for. The transformation wasn't immediate, nor was it dramatic, but it was real. Peter was beginning to shift his view of his father, and perhaps more importantly, his view of strength itself. It was subtle at first. Peter no longer mocked Benjamin for his peaceful nature. Instead, he began to ask questions, small, tentative questions that hinted at a deeper curiosity. But as the weeks passed, an unspoken tension lingered in the air, particularly between father and son. While Peter had clearly been affected by the competition, he was still wrestling with the change. And for Benjamin, who had always valued peace above all else, there was an undercurrent of impatience. He knew that Peter needed time, but the waiting, the uncertainty, was becoming harder to bear. Then, one evening, as Benjamin sat at the kitchen table, polishing his old, worn toolbox, Peter walked in, looking more troubled than Benjamin had seen him in a long time. His brow was furrowed, his hands stuffed in the pockets of his hoodie as he walked with an uncertain gait, like someone unsure of how to confront the person who had, in many ways, become a stranger. "Dad," Peter began, his voice uncharacteristically quiet, "I've been thinking a lot about what you showed me and about what you've been trying to teach me." Benjamin put the toolbox down and looked up, his heart pounding, uncertain of where this conversation would go. He had seen Peter shift, but he wasn't sure if the shift was complete. There had been so many moments in the past where Peter had seemed on the verge of understanding only to fall back into his old habits of judgment. But this time, the look in Peter's eyes felt different. There was a hesitation, a vulnerability in him that Benjamin hadn't seen before. "I've been having this fight in my head," Peter continued, nervously rubbing the back of his neck. "You were right about what you said after the competition. I've been going through a lot of things in my head, and it's like I can't stop thinking about how you handled that whole situation. And I keep thinking about what you said about strength. You're not sure because it means taking on something bigger than you've ever done before, right?" Benjamin asked, his voice soft but knowing. Peter nodded, his eyes looking down as if ashamed of the vulnerability he was showing. "Yeah, it's not just about the job, though. It's the pressure. I've always thought I had to push harder than everyone else to get ahead. But now, I'm thinking about what you said about finding my own strength. And I'm not sure if I'm ready for all this." Benjamin stepped forward, placing a hand on Peter's shoulder. "Peter, strength isn't about pushing harder than everyone else. It's about knowing when to push and when to let go. Sometimes, true strength is recognizing that you don't have to prove anything to anyone but yourself." Peter looked up at his father, his face a mixture of confusion and hope. "So you think I should take the job?" Benjamin hesitated, not because he doubted his son, but because he wanted Peter to reach this conclusion on his own, to embrace the choice with clarity. "I think you should take a moment and ask yourself why you want it. Not just for the money or the status, but for you. Is it something you really want, or is it something you think you should want?" Peter stood there in silence for a long time, his mind clearly running through every possible scenario. He had spent so much of his life chasing after success, trying to prove himself worthy of respect, and he didn't know if he could make this decision without the pressure of his old beliefs. But as the minutes stretched on, something inside him began to click. He had learned from his father that it wasn't about following the world's script. It was about writing his own. Finally, Peter spoke, his voice more resolute than it had ever been. "I think I know what I need to do, Dad. It's not about just taking any job to prove something. It's about choosing something that fits who I am. I need to stop chasing approval and start chasing what I actually want." Benjamin smiled, feeling a warmth spread through him. For the first time, he saw his son truly embracing the lesson he had tried so hard to convey. It wasn't about fighting for a place at the table. It was about carving out your own space, defining your own worth, and knowing when to stand firm and when to step back. "Exactly, Peter," Benjamin said softly. "You don't need anyone's approval to know your own value. Take your time with this decision. Your strength is not in how fast you run or how hard you fight. It's in knowing who you are and being true to that." Peter looked at his father, and in that moment, the tension that had existed between them for so long began to dissolve completely. Peter no longer saw Benjamin as the man who was afraid to fight. He saw him as the man who had fought every day, not with fists, but with principles. His father wasn't weak because he chose peace. He was strong because he had the courage to stay true to his beliefs, even when the world demanded otherwise. Peter smiled, a genuine smile that reflected a newfound understanding. "Thanks, Dad," he said, his voice full of gratitude. "I think I get it now. I think I really do." As Benjamin watched Peter leave the garage to make the call, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride. This wasn't about winning a competition or proving a point. It was about the journey they had both taken together, learning that strength was never defined by physical force or the approval of others. It was about the quiet resilience to stand by your own beliefs, even when the world told you to fight differently. In that moment, Benjamin realized that the greatest victory wasn't in the competition itself. It was in seeing his son begin to find his own strength. And for Benjamin, that was enough. A few weeks passed after Peter's decision, and things between him and Benjamin had changed in ways neither of them had anticipated. The tension that had once suffocated their relationship had slowly been replaced by a new sense of understanding. It wasn't that everything was perfect, it never would be, but there was a quiet respect between them now, a shared knowledge that they had both learned something invaluable. Peter had taken a job, but with a new perspective. He wasn't chasing the same ambitions he once thought defined success. He had chosen this path not to prove anything to anyone, but because it aligned with his values and his vision for his future. He had found the courage to let go of the need for validation and embrace the strength that had always been within him. Benjamin couldn't help but feel a quiet pride every time he watched his son walk out the door with a new sense of purpose, a sense of self-assurance he hadn't seen before. But the greatest reward for Benjamin was not in Peter's external achievements. It was in the quiet conversations they had, the way Peter began to open up about his fears, his hopes, and his dreams. He was no longer afraid to be vulnerable with his father, and Benjamin knew this was the true change that had taken place. One evening, as the two of them sat together in the living room, the TV playing softly in the background, Peter turned to Benjamin with a serious look on his face. It was a moment that Benjamin had been waiting for, the moment when Peter would say something that truly reflected how far he had come. "Dad, I've been thinking," Peter began, his voice thoughtful, "about everything you've taught me. And I just wanted to say, I get it now. I get that strength isn't about fighting for the biggest thing or proving you the best. It's about knowing when to stand your ground and when to let go. It's about having the courage to be who you really are without needing anyone's approval." Benjamin looked at his son, a warm smile spreading across his face. "I'm glad to hear that, Peter. You're on your own path now, and I'm proud of you for choosing it. You're not just learning how to fight for yourself. You're learning how to live for yourself." Peter nodded, his eyes filled with sincerity. "I always thought that you were just avoiding the tough stuff, avoiding confrontation. But now, I see that your strength was never about avoiding anything. It was about knowing when not to fight. You taught me that real power comes from within, and it's about knowing what to stand for, even when no one's watching." Benjamin sat back in his chair, his heart swelling with pride. This wasn't just about Peter's success or his decision to take the job. It was about something deeper. It was about the way Peter had begun to understand the core of what Benjamin had always tried to teach him. Strength is about emotional resilience, self-awareness, and the ability to choose your battles wisely. "I'm proud of you, son," Benjamin said, his voice full of emotion. "You're stronger than you know, and the strength you're learning now will carry you through every challenge life throws your way. But remember this, strength isn't just about what you do. It's about who you are when you do it. And you're becoming the kind of man I always knew you could be." Peter's eyes softened as he absorbed his father's words, and for the first time in a long while, Benjamin saw a genuine smile on his son's face. It wasn't the smile of a young man trying to prove something. It was the smile of someone who had found peace, someone who was finally at home with who they were. "I'm not there yet," Peter said quietly, "but I'm on my way, and that feels good." Benjamin reached over and placed his hand on Peter's shoulder, a simple gesture of solidarity. He didn't need to say more. The bond they had, which had once been fractured by misunderstandings and misconceptions, was now solidified by a shared understanding, a mutual respect that was built on the foundation of emotional strength, not physical power. It was a lesson Benjamin had been waiting a lifetime to teach, and one Peter had finally understood in his own way. As they sat together in the fading light of the evening, Benjamin couldn't help but reflect on how far they had come. There had been moments of doubt, moments when he questioned whether his approach to life would ever resonate with his son. But now, seeing Peter standing firm in his own strength, Benjamin knew that his quiet path had always been the right one. And though Peter was just beginning to carve his own way, Benjamin felt a sense of peace he had never experienced before. The journey wasn't over for either of them. There would be challenges ahead, fights to be fought, choices to be made, but they were no longer fighting alone. They were walking this path together, each learning from the other, each growing in strength in their own way.